Well, firstly, hello everyone. Welcome back. We only spoke Monday, didn't we? From that, with our session on sexual offences. So, what's today? This is our fifth, sadly, our final Crammer session. So, today we're going to be looking at property offences. From there, really interesting subject. From there, we're going to cover well most of it, really. I think in this hour. I guess everyone joining us now knows me from now. My name's James, and I'm one of the tutors for police revision, and I'll be taking the session today, as I've taken the other sessions. Now, just a little bit of admin from that. I think there was a mention last time about uploading the previous webinars. Harry has done a fantastic job, and he's put them all on one link, which we're going to attach to the chat bar. So for anyone that's missed any of those sessions, then you'll have an opportunity to watch them. Harry, perfect timing, always the professional from that. You can click on, and our first one, remember, we looked at question types and we looked at case law and the importance and really how to answer a question, and we covered a good few topics around that. Then we moved on to general principles and police powers, and we looked at entry, search and seizure and a few other areas. Then we had that really interesting session on serious crime, where we looked at things like homicide and misuse of drugs. And then on Monday, we went through sexual offences, and we spoke about how important they are, but how important ages are in those, and how if you can learn those offences and just the little slight alterations between them and the differences, that it's worth a lot of marks. Really good from that. So today's session is brought to you again by Police Revision, one of the leading providers of revision material, and of course Police Oracle. And I'm really pleased to be presenting. So what are we looking at today? Well, I think I said it earlier, didn't I? We are looking at property offences. So let's put some context around this. So in the exam, very similar to sexual offences, in the NIE, you're going to have roughly about 10 to 15 questions. It varies from that, and slightly higher on the sergeants and inspectors. But it does cover a large number of topics. But once we get to understand theft and its concepts, which is the backbone of acquisitive crime, you know all this by now because your exam's next week, where you'll really get an understanding from it, and it's going to be a good refresher because you know all of this from here. So we're going to look at robbery, we're going to look at blackmail, we're going to recover burglary. We touched on that in the first session, in our very first webinar. We'll have a quick look at fraud offences, handling stolen goods, proceeds of crime, and criminal damage. We're going to do the whole lot. So there's absolutely lots to get through. Now, as I said before, we'll have some questions. I know you guys are fantastic at those questions. Pop your answers, if you so wish, on the chat bar once we read them out, and we will go through some learning, and then we'll move on. As the other sessions, I think there's about 7 questions in here. You're going to ace them all. I know you are. You're absolutely fantastic. As I say, if you pick this up as a refresher, it's brilliant. Use the hour, but let's kick off and start off with property offences. And it makes sense to start with the area of theft. And also, we'll start in our normal way, and we'll get you to do the work and look at a question. So our first question. Well, Sebastian is house-sitting his friend Camille's house while she's on holiday. Sebastian receives a phone call from his drug dealer telling him that he must settle his £500 drug debt in the next 24 hours or suffer the consequences. Sebastian does not have £500, so takes Camille's television. Unknown user, I can't see the slideshow on the screen. Can anyone else see the slideshow on the screen? It is helpful. If you can give me a thumbs up if you can see it or something. If not, unknown user, sometimes if you log back out and log back in, Harry will let you straight back in. It does reset from there. Thank you everyone for that. Thanks, Chloe, Tom. Thanks. So yeah, I think that sometimes it's a little bit of a glitch. Right, so let's go back to Sebastian. Well, he doesn't have the £500, so he takes Camille's television down to the pawn shop and sells it, or pawns it, for £400, and this allows him to pay off his debt with a little bit of extra cash. He goes back to Camille's house and, using her computer, applies to the bank for a £500 loan, aware that if accepted, this will take 3 days to come through. Sebastian knows Camille isn't back for a week, so thinks this is sufficient time. So we're considering an intention to permanently deprive within theft. Which of the following answers is correct? A. Sebastian is not liable for theft as he has no intention to permanently deprive Camille. He's applying for a loan to get the money back. Sebastian is liable for theft as he's treated the television as his own, although he has an intention to buy it back. This may not be possible. Sebastian has consensual access to his friend Camille's house, therefore does not commit theft. Or D, Sebastian has an honestly held belief that he can recover the property and therefore has not committed theft. You're so wonderful. I try and speed up because I can see all of the B's coming on the screen from there. But of course, absolutely superb, everybody, from there. Let's go down. So B, Sebastian is liable for theft as he has treated the television as his own. Although he has an intention to buy it back, this may not be possible. So this area deals with the concept of permanently deprived, which is an important element when understanding the concept of theft. And this is covered under Section 6 of the Theft Act 1968. A person appropriating property belonging to another without meaning the other permanently to lose the thing itself is nevertheless to be regarded as having the intention of permanently depriving the other of it if his intention is to treat the thing as his own, really important that, to dispose of regardless of the other's rights, and the borrowing or lending of it may amount to so treating it as if, but only if the borrowing or lending is for a period and in circumstances making it equivalent to an outright taking or disposal. So the key here is treating the thing or object as one's own. So, in its simplest form, taking a bottle of vodka from a shop and drinking the contents, well, you've certainly treated the vodka as their own. They've permanently deprived the shop of it by stealing and consuming it. But as in our question, what if there is a condition attached, such as I will return your bicycle if you pay me £400? Well, then the bicycle can be taken as permanently deprived, as it'll only be returned when the condition is met. Now, our scenario is a little bit different. It's covered by the second part of Section 6. Without prejudice to the generality of subsection 1, where a person having possession or control, lawfully or not, of property belonging to another, parts with the property under a condition as to its return, which he may not be able to perform. This, if it's done for purposes of his own and without the other's authority, amounts to treating the property as his own to dispose of regardless of the other's rights. Quite simply, our scenario, the pawning of property. Sebastian has intention to get the loan and pay it back, but there's no certainty of this, and by this virtue, Sebastian is treating the property as his own and has committed theft. Right, but we've got a little bit ahead of ourselves there, but it's really good to cover permanently deprived. But let's go back and remind ourselves of the definition of theft, because it does underrun a lot of these property offences. A person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. So I've highlighted some key words that we need to understand that underpin all theft offences. They are dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another and an intention to permanently deprive. Now, I think it's really important that we look at these concepts because you can be examined on them and they have a bearing on the offences. So let's move on to dishonestly. Well, whether a person is dishonest is a question of fact for the jury or magistrate to decide, but to help us, Section 2 outlines ways in which a person may not be dishonest and one they could be. Well, I like to remember this by simplifying it to key words: right in law, consent, lost, payment. So let's start with the first. A person's appropriation of property belonging to another is not to be regarded as dishonest if he appropriates the property in the belief that he has in law the right to deprive the other of it, on behalf of himself or of a third person. Well, an example of this is someone who's owed money, let's say £100, and hasn't been paid back after numerous requests, so attends the person's house and takes their lawnmower from their garden to cover the debt. Well, they have an honest held belief that they have a right in law to deprive the other of it. So moving on, what about consent? Well, if he appropriates property and the property in the belief that he would have the other's consent if the other knew of the appropriation and the circumstances of it. Well, again, it's a little bit of common sense. It's quite straightforward. We tend to overcomplicate things in law. You have an honest held belief that the person will consent to you taking the item. So think about being in an office at work on a hot day. The ice cream van arrives, you've been working with your colleague for many years, it's cash only and you're desperate for an ice cream, and your colleague, who, as I said, you get on fantastically well with, keeps loose change on their desk, and you take £3 for that loose change to pay for your ice cream. And you truly believe that they would consent, because in your mind, next time you're going to buy them an ice cream, you're going to pay them back. Well, if they come back and accuse you of theft, you can argue reasonably believed that they would consent. Then you have not acted dishonestly. Well, what about lost? Except where the property came to him as a trustee or personal representative, if he appropriates the property in the belief that the person to whom the property belongs cannot be discovered by taking reasonable steps. So an example of this is you're returning from the beach, you've had a nice day at the beach, and on a public wall is a brand new pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses, which you pick up. Now, if you have a reasonable belief that you will not be able to find the owner by taking reasonable steps, as there say are thousands of people that have used the beach that day, then you are not dishonest. And it's your belief that you will not discover the owner by taking reasonable steps, not the steps that have to be taken. Okay, so it has to be your belief that you will not find the person who the property belongs to. And finally, payment. A person's appropriation of property belonging to another may be dishonest, notwithstanding that he is willing to pay for the property. So the first three, we've looked at ways that you're not dishonest, and this one deals with how you could be. So what does this mean? Well, imagine that I own a movie prop. Let's say I am very lucky and I own one of the shark's teeth from the movie Jaws that I keep in a beautiful display case, and I'm the envy of my friend Thomas, who is desperate to buy that movie prop off me. And I value that movie prop, that tooth, at £2,000. But Thomas has asked me to sell that tooth, and I have said, no, I want to keep it. Well, one day, Thomas is visiting my house, I pop out, and he takes the prop display and tooth and leaves in its place an envelope with £2,500 cash in it. So 500 more than the tooth's valued at. Well, even though it's above the marketplace, or you've got a hand up here from that, do you want to pop the question on the chat bar? There's only a lot to get through, and then we'll, and if so, I'll speak to you at the end of the session, or see if we can cover it off, if that's all right. Is that you, Jennifer? Oh, Jennifer, we'll take that Jennifer's put a hand up from there, but we'll deal with that from there. So even though it is above the market price, he knows I don't want to sell it and therefore could be dishonest. So that is just about dishonesty. But for exam purposes, remember this. If they are not dishonest, you do not have a theft, and that affects a lot of offences. So what about appropriates? Well, appropriates is covered under Section 3 of the Theft Act. Any assumption by a person of the rights of an owner amounts to an appropriation, and this includes where he has come by the property, innocently or not, without stealing it, any later assumption of a right to it by keeping or dealing with it as owner. So owners have rights to the property they own. For example, I own my mobile phone and I can sell it, give it away, I can smash it, damage, destroy it because I own it. However, if someone who doesn't own my phone takes it, gives it away, sells it, then they have assumed the rights of the owner. And any assumptions by a person of the rights of the owner amounts to appropriation. So let's have a look at the different ways one can appropriate property. Taking or depriving. Now, there's no need always for the property to be physically taken, nor the owner deprived of it for appropriation, but you will need to demonstrate that they have taken ownership in some way. Consent, well, is not always relevant when it comes to appropriation. Now, a really interesting piece of case law is the case of Lawrence, where a tourist handed over his wallet to a taxi driver, and this was a foreign tourist. And he handed over to that taxi driver, who then helped himself to much more than the fare was owed. So even though the tourist demonstrated he had consensually handed over his wallet, there was really a condition with that. He handed it over for the taxi driver to take the correct amount of money, because he wasn't aware of the sort of values of money from there. The moment the taxi driver takes more than he's owed, so let's say the fare was £10 and he's taken a £50 note, then he has gone over. So he has appropriated that cash, even though consent was given. Gifting property, well, an example of this would be an elderly man, for example, gifting money to a younger female when the female is aware that he is vulnerable and she's pretending perhaps to be in love with him. And even though he's giving it willingly, it doesn't negate appropriation. And of course, goods interference. And we know that classic case, and the classic question comes up of swapping price labels as something that has a label of, say, £25 on it and putting a sticker over it that says £2. And that again amounts to appropriation. And also a late assumption of rights. So realizing when in the car that your young child has taken something from the store, say a necklace, without your knowledge, and you can see the store in front of you and you look at that and decide to keep it, well, it could still count as appropriation. And finally, buying in good faith, where property or a right or interest in property is or purports to be transferred for value to a person acting in good faith, no later assumption by him of rights which he believed himself to be acquiring shall, by reason of any defect in the transferor's title, amount to the theft of property. Well, that's a nice, easy paragraph to understand. What does that mean? Well, it means that buying in good faith, a person who purchases something in good faith and pays a price reasonable for the goods, such as an expensive phone from an established used phone dealership who can deal in such electronics, and then later finds out that it's stolen, would not attract liability for theft, even if they refused to return it to the original owner. So moving on to property. Any property includes money and all other property, real or personal, including things in action and other intangible property. Well, let's start with things growing wild. A person who picks fruit, flowers or foliage growing wild on any land will not commit theft unless the picking is for sale, reward or commercial gain. Now, mushrooms is an interesting one because they have to be taken whole. That's how you harvest them from there. But any other plant that is taken entirely as opposed to pick could lead to liability of theft as it cannot be regrown. That's the same as sawing through a tree. And what about creatures of the wild? You see our lovely rabbit we've got here. Well, I like to think of all wild creatures as property. So think, first of all, as wild creatures that are not tamed and not usually kept in captivity and have not been reduced into anyone's possession will not be property. Anything roll from that. So walking in public woods and finding and taking a dead wild rabbit, well, that rabbit would not be classified as property. Land, you generally cannot steal land unless you are a trustee or personal representative dishonestly disposing of it. You can also steal land if you sever things from it, topsoil or plants, unless you are a tenant, whereby you can only steal fixtures and fittings. So you can certainly steal a shed, but cutting a blackberry bush in the garden is unlikely to fulfill. Human bodies, they have a question on human bodies. Well, human bodies are not property per se, but they could be if they have an attribute to them, such as a preserved body in a gallery is property belonging to that gallery, and also perhaps an amputated and preserved arm used for medical students because it's been turned into that article to be used for teaching. So it's got an extra element. Fluids, however, are property. So a blood sample taken from yourself could be stolen. And we know that electricity is not property, as it has its own offence. Well, there's lots here we're going through. What about finally looking at belonging to another? Well, this includes someone in possession, in control, or having a proprietary right to the thing. So property belonging to another, well, does not necessarily mean that you need to know the exact person for whom it belongs to. There's a really famous case where golf balls taken from a course that have been abandoned by the owners had reverted to the ownership of the golf club, and therefore the theft conviction stood. And that involved they were collecting them from a lake, but the argument on that was that, well, the golfers have just left them, but actually they have reverted to the ownership of the golf club. Charity is a really common question that comes up. Charitable trusts are enforceable by the Attorney General, and when money is donated to a charity, it becomes the property of the charity as soon as it is donated. So imagine you're holding your £10 note, and you see somebody collecting for a charity, which is going to be Save the Badgers. We're going to be from that. The moment that £10 note is placed into the charity tin, then that becomes the money of the charity. And obligations to return property, where there is a legal obligation that if funds are received mistakenly from another, then they must retain, deal, and return that property. So there's absolutely loads of theft there. And those concepts are really, really important when we start looking at other offences. And that's the perfect time now to move on to the offences of robbery and blackmail. Now, we often get questions in exams around robbery and blackmail. So why don't we start with a question on robbery? I'll try and speed up for this one. Oliver has a large gambling debt. He's aware that Etienne is a successful businessman and every Friday lunchtime attends the local bank to pay him money. This is kept in a briefcase Etienne holds. Oliver waits for Etienne on the route he walks, and as Etienne turns the corner, Oliver strikes the briefcase with his fist, causing the handle to break and the main part of the briefcase fall to the floor. Oliver collects this up and runs away. At no point does he make contact with any part of Etienne's body. He is disappointed on checking the briefcase to find that it only contains paperwork. Considering the full offence of robbery, which of the following statements is correct? A. The offence of robbery is not made out as no physical contact has been made with Etienne. B. Etienne has not committed robbery as the contents of the briefcase contain generic paperwork. C. Oliver has the intention to put Etienne in fear. The offence is made out as soon as he strikes the briefcase with his fist. Or D. The striking of the briefcase with his fist is sufficient to demonstrate use of force within the offence. Right, how's everyone doing? So, Rob D, Chris D, Unknown User D, Andrew G D, Jordan D, Tom D, fantastic. Oh, Sam D, listen, you guys are going to absolutely ace this. You're already magnificent detectives and training. You're absolutely going to ace this exam coming up. And those that are taking the science exam, you're going to ace that. You're doing really well. This is fantastic. Really well done, guys. It's lovely to see from that. From there, yes. So D, the striking of the briefcase with his fist is sufficient to demonstrate use of force within the offence. And we know that force can be used indirectly, as it is here on the briefcase, and no physical injury or contact is required to take place on the individual. So the robbery is not complete until the actual briefcase is stolen and the contents of the briefcase are irrelevant. The offence is still made out. Well, that'll take us on to robbery. But I mean, you're doing so fantastic. I think I should allow you to do this part. This is going to be really good, guys. A person is guilty of robbery if he steals and immediately before or at the time of doing so, and in order to do so, he uses force on any person or puts or seeks to put any person in fear of being then and there subjected to force. So theft. Well, in all robbery offences, there must be an element of theft. And exams, this is usually negated where the offender believes that they have a right in law to deprive the victim of the money. Remember, no theft, no robbery. Now, very likely there are other offences. Well, there are going to be other offences, of course there are, because force is being used. But if there's no theft, if you have an honest held belief that you have a right to that property, then it will negate the offence. Well, what about time frame? Well, force must be used or the threat made immediately before or at the time. So if it's used after the theft, no robbery. And those examples from there of, and you might remember it from training school when you were there, and we speak about the pub fight that's happened and one man hits another man after they have an argument over the football or similar from there, and the other man's laying on the floor and he thinks, oh, do you know what? I'm going to have his wallet away. Well, that has happened after the event, so we haven't got a robbery. So it's got to be immediately before or at the time. So guidance on how much before the threat or force must be used is minimal and will be largely up to a jury, but a common sense approach is given to this. So a theft can become a robbery. And this is interesting from here because at the time, so for example, consider a man who walks out of a house with a stolen TV. He picks up stolen TV. In fact, we use Sebastian. We'll change it around a little bit. And he's walking out with that TV. And as he's walking out, Camille walks into the house and says, Sebastian, what are you doing? And at the time, Sebastian punches her in the face. Well, when he first picked up the TV, then he's committing a theft or burglary. But as soon as he's walking out with that TV and he punches Camille in the face, well, we look at the time of doing so from there. So it's all part of the continuing act. In order to do so, the threat or force must be for the purpose of carrying out the theft. An assault because of a disagreement, as I described, over a football match and taking a wallet, it wouldn't constitute, would not constitute robbery. From there, the force used must be intentional, but does not need to be significant. And force, as we know, can also be used on property, as per our question, such as snatching a handbag from the victim or our briefcase. So I just wanted to clarify around third person when it comes to robbery. So the case of R.V. Taylor, 1996, well, this case deals with the threat of force. Now, if the threat of force is against the person that they are intending to steal from, so for example, give me your handbag or I'll stab you, then a robbery is made out. But what happens if the threat of force is against a third person? So let's use an example. An offender walks into a newsagent's and says to the clerk, he says behind the counter, "Look over there. If you don't give me the contents of the till, my friend is going to stab that customer." Now the clerk looks over and he sees the second offender standing behind an unaware customer. This is not a robbery, but it becomes a robbery if the customer turns around and the second offender holds up his fist and then the first offender repeats their demand. That's because they are now in fear. But that's enough of robbery because time's getting behind us. So let's have a look at a close offence of blackmail, and let's kick off with a question. Paul approaches Martin and tells him that he's aware that he has a 5-year-old son. Paul tells Martin that unless he pays him £5,000 cash on Friday, it's currently Monday, his son will be kidnapped. Martin does not believe the threat and tells Paul to go away or he'll hurt him. Considering the offence of blackmail, which of the following statements is correct? A, the offence of blackmail is not made out as Martin does not believe the threat. B, the offence of blackmail is committed up until the point that Martin refutes the demand. C, the offence of blackmail has been committed as soon as Paul makes the demand. Or the offence of blackmail is not committed as the threat is not going to occur for 5 days. So just take your time. You've got a few D's there, mainly C's coming up from Amy and Rob and Sam. No, lots of C's now. Lots and lots of C's coming up. So have we got the offence of blackmail? Right. The offence of blackmail has been committed as soon as Paul makes the demand. Answer C. Well done, everybody. Now, an offence of blackmail is committed the moment a person makes the demand with menaces. There's no need for the person to believe the threat. If we read the offence, a person is guilty of blackmail if, with a view to gain for himself or another, or with intent to cause loss to another, he makes any unwarranted demand with menaces. And for this purpose, a demand with menaces is unwarranted unless the person making it does so in the belief, A, that he has reasonable grounds for making the demand, and B, that the use of menaces is a proper means of reinforcing the demand. The nature of the act or omission demanded is immaterial, and it's also immaterial whether the menaces relate to action to be taken by the person making the demand. Well, how does a person can argue the demand was reasonable and proper, and that the particular menaces used was a proper means of reinforcing it? But a threat to commit criminal offences, as in our case, is never going to be acceptable. But what this does is it does offer some protection to, say, debt collection agencies or persons sending threatening letters in relation to court proceedings and similar. So that's right round. But if ever the threat is to commit a criminal offence, it will not be accepted. So, to remind ourselves, a person is guilty of blackmail if, with a view to gain for himself or another, or with intent to cause loss to another, he makes any unwarranted demand with menaces, unless he has a belief that there are reasonable grounds for making the demand and that the use of menaces is the proper means of making that demand. Well, let's have a little drill into this now, just to cover it off. Well, gain. Well, that includes keeping what one has as well as getting what they do not have. So it means that you could blackmail of something that you have wagered perhaps, or something from that, and you decide to put a blackmail in so that it doesn't happen. I think an example of that is, say, if a bet had gone on a on a football match, and suddenly you put a lot of money on that football match, and you find out that the star striker that is scored all the goals for the club that you've bet on is taken off injured. And what you do is you start threatening the referee, you start blackmailing him to say the game's got to be called off, you've got to do this, call it off. Well, you haven't actually lost your money at the moment, but what you're trying to do is to keep what you haven't lost. You want to keep your bet. From that includes a loss, the same as that includes a loss by not getting one might, as well as a loss by parting with one has. Well, what about menaces? Well, this includes threats, but also menaces specific to a victim. So saying to someone who suffers from arachnophobia, a fear of spiders, that if they do not do something, then they'll release spiders into their bedroom when sleeping, well, can be sufficient because it's specific to them. And a serious threat, even if the victim is not intimidated by it, could still lead to the offence being made out if the threat was of such a nature that a person of normal stability would fear it. So really interesting point that. So a serious threat, even if the victim isn't intimidated by it. If a person of normal stability would look at that and go, that's a really serious threat from that, even if the victim's not concerned, it still could be carried out. Now, reasonable grounds for making the demand, they are few and far between from that. We spoke about criminal offences. So the case of R.V. Harvey led to the court finding that threats to kill and rape can never be acceptable ways of reinforcing a demand. And we spoke about the debt collectors. And of course, attempted blackmail is near impossible, as either the demand with menaces is being made or it's not. Right, 6:34. Look at this. It's going on time. Burglary. Okay, we did cover burglary and aggravated burglary in our first webinar, so you'll absolutely ace it as you always do. Let's just recover it quickly now because you always know there's going to be questions coming up on burglary and aggravated burglary. So Nelson has the intention of breaking into a gallery and stealing a valuable painting. He's aware that on occasions the gallery employs a security guard, so takes with him a crowbar to use to attack anyone if he's challenged. Nelson approaches the back of the gallery and uses the crowbar to force open a rear window. He enters the gallery and makes his way to the gallery. I've worded that awfully, sorry. He removes the painting and on walking out is surprised to find a staff member in the corridor. He takes the crowbar out and threatens that if they scream, he will hit them. The staff member screams, so Nelson hits them once with the crowbar, causing ABH injuries before making good his escape. At what point does Nelson first commit the offence of aggravated burglary? Is it A, when he breaks into the gallery, B, when he steals the painting, C, when he threatens the staff member, or D, when he strikes the staff member? Just have a quick all these wonderful A's coming up. A, brilliant. Look at this. Absolutely fantastic. A, look at you. Rob, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, I hope it's A, otherwise I'm looking very, very silly. It's A, when he breaks into the gallery. Wonderful knowledge of aggravated burglary, and really important because they're the type of questions that you will be faced from here, and you've got it all straight away. The offence is made out when he has the crowbar with him to break in. Why? It's a weapon of offence. He has it with him and with an intention to cause injury if challenged. So we know from 918 a person is guilty of burglary if he enters any building or part of a building as a trespasser and with intent to commit a specified offence or inflicting GBH on anyone therein, stealing anything therein, or committing unlawful damage or attempting. And we know to move it to aggravated burglary if he commits any burglary and at the time has with him any firearm or imitation firearm, any weapon of offence or explosive. So just to remind ourselves, a firearm includes an air gun or air pistol, and an imitation firearm means anything which has the appearance of being a firearm, whether capable of being discharged or not. A weapon of offence means any article made or adapted for the use of causing injury to or incapacitating a person, or intended by the person having it with him for such use. Remember, incapacitating a person. We love a question when they talk about taking in a little bit of meat laced with sleeping tablets for the guard dog from there. Remember, it's about incapacitating a person, so chloroform or something like that, or cable ties. An explosive means any article manufactured for the purpose of producing a practical effect by explosion or intended by the person having it with him for that purpose. And what about has with him? That's an interesting concept for aggravated burglary. We'll just cover that quickly now, actually. Well, the defendant will need to show an element of immediate control over the item. The likeliest, but not exclusive, is directly carrying. So in our example, you're carrying the crowbar. And they also need to have knowledge of the possession of one of these weapon of offences or firearms from that. Now, multiple persons can be charged with aggravated burglary if they're aware that one of the gang has a weapon of offence on them and their intention for using it. Now, going right back to those general principles that we learned at the start, remember we used that example with John and Mark about breaking in, and I think Mark believed they were going to do a commercial burglary at night that was unoccupied, and John had different intentions. He was going in to seriously hurt someone in there, but Mark was unaware of this and didn't realise that John was carrying a knife. It separates it from there. Can Mark be criminally liable if John goes and seriously injures or kills the person inside? You know, the further it goes apart, remember we said that the less knowledge means it's less likely. But if they break into a house or a place together and they're well aware that John is in his pocket, he's got a claw hammer, and the purpose John's got that claw hammer is if he's challenged by a security guard, and Mark's fully aware of this, then absolutely they're both. The more knowledge you have, the more criminal liability that you have. Right, so as I said, we're going to have a really quick reminder because time just ticks away. How is it 22 from there? So 91A, we know, enters any building or part of a building as a trespasser and steals, commits GBH, or commits unlawful damage to anyone or anything therein. Now, remember we spoke in the first, entry only needs to be effective. So we spoke about that example of walking past, smashing that window, leaning that arm in and stealing that jewelry. That is effective. That's smash and grab burglar. And we also spoke about the instrument in the first one to carry out the offence. So you remember the person that comes along with a fishing rod, and he's going to use that fishing rod to put through that letterbox to go and hook the wallet or the handbag and pull it through so he can get it. Well, that acts as an extension of his body and counts as entering. But if he uses that fishing rod only to facilitate entry, then it does not count as an extension of the body. 91B, having entered, remember that, entered as a building or part of a building as a trespasser, steals or attempts to steal or inflicts or attempts to inflict GBH on anyone therein. So we know about this from that. We spoke about moving from rooms. We know for 91B that entry needs to have been made, but they don't have the intention necessarily when they're going in, or don't have the intention when they're going in. So do you remember the very first question we ever looked at was the homeless male who broke in to the block of offices. He went through an insecure window of the block of offices because he was cold, and the realise was he was going in for shelter. Now, one, he was in there, so he was a trespasser, but he was in there for shelter. So he had no intention to steal, no intention to commit GBH or damage when he went in. From that, he was only going to sleep. But he wakes up, sees the mobile phone, and takes that mobile phone. So he's entered a building as a trespasser and steals the mobile phone. An aggravated burglary we've covered from that. We know about it becomes aggravated at the point of entry. Well, fantastic, you got that answer correctly from there. So 3 key offences, really, really well done, everyone. So let's just very cover with a couple of examples. So 91A, A is outside of a large detached house belonging to B. He has the intention of stealing all the jewellery within the dwelling. B is out for the evening, smashes a window, enters, steals all of B's jewellery. Classic burglary. And we understand 91B, we spoke exactly about that just now, enters for a insecure building. For that, trespassing, it's cold, but steals inside. And aggravated, of course, our example. You go into a premise holding a bayonet or something that we know from that, or in this kind of scenario, use a carving knife to challenge a security guard, then the offence is complete. Listen, that's absolutely fantastic. Shall we have one more question, then look at some key points, and we'll move on. So, Ralph is drunk and walking home along a canal. He has an argument with his girlfriend, who has told him that she has locked the door and he is not allowed in. He notices a canal barge where the door is slightly ajar. He looks around and boards the barge. The barge is unoccupied and he falls asleep in the bed. He wakes up in the morning and sees a decorative gold bracelet on the side. Believing this would be a brilliant make-up gift, he steals it and leaves the barge. What Ralph doesn't know is that the barge is uninhabited at this time, as the owners have emigrated abroad and have failed to make any payments, meaning it's been repossessed. Which of the following statements is correct? Ralph is guilty of burglary 91B as he's stolen the bracelet whilst trespassing on the barge. Ralph is not guilty of burglary as the canal barge is not classified as a building as it's uninhabited at the time he stole the bracelet. Ralph is guilty of the burglary 91A as he's entered the barge as a trespasser and stolen the bracelet. Or D, Ralph is not guilty of burglary as the canal barge was not occupied at the time it was entered. Okay, so we got a few B's coming up now. Just let the others have a few more seconds for people to have a look. So all B's, look at that, absolutely all B's. Wow. And the answer is B. Look at this, you knowledge of canal boats as well. You are going to absolutely, it's going to be a record. It's going to be a record. Ralph is not guilty of burglary. The canal barge is not classified as a building as it's uninhabited at the time he stole the bracelet. Well, Section 9.4 of the Theft Act states that an inhabited vehicle is included within the definition of a building. This is designed to cover houseboats and caravans which are permanently inhabited. However, a canal boat that is not inhabited is not a building, as whilst it may be capable of habitation, it is not being lived in. A building then is generally considered to be a structure of a permanent nature, but if it has the attributes of a building, then it likely is one. Mains, electricity, running water. Tents are not included, and ultimately anything that falls out of the above classification would fall to a jury to decide. But something as simple as a no entry sign with a rope could separate parts of a building. Absolutely brilliant. Let's have just a few points of key terms. So trespassing. Well, the offender can also be reckless as to whether they are trespassing, and it's important to consider conditions of circumstances when being allowed entry. So consider an electrician who's come to fix a plug in the kitchen. He has permission to come into the kitchen and most probably use the toilet. But if he goes into the main bedroom and steals jewelry or a watch, then he would be trespassing when entering the bedroom, as he's aware that permission does not extend to that room. Conditional intent, well, this is best demonstrated in an example. A has the intention to seriously cause harm to B, who he believes is residing at B's home, forces entry into B's home only to find the house unoccupied as B is on holiday abroad. So he's still committed 9-1A. We spoke about it, didn't we? Likewise, if someone breaks into a property with the intention to steal, but there's nothing worth stealing, they still commit it. And we know we spoke about from that has with him the when it comes to aggravated burglary. Right, we better hurry up. Look at this, it goes so quickly. I've been overconfident here to get everything in, but we're going to get it in. Right, let's have a look at fraud. Let's just have a look at the offences of fraud. Right, lots of offences by fraud. Let's start. Fraud by false representation. So dishonesty makes a false representation and intends through this to make a gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose another to a risk of loss. So a representation is something that is false or misleading, and the person making it knows this to be the case. And the false representation can be through conduct such as using a stolen credit card at a self-scam machine. I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with fraud by false representations in your career so far. Fraud by failing to disclose. Dishonesty fails to disclose to another person, which he has a legal duty to disclose with the intention to make a gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose another to a risk of loss. Now, a legal duty is not defined, but a common sense approach needs to be taken, and it relates to contracts and official documents. And I've used the example of failing to disclose a heart condition when obtaining life insurance. So what's the gain there? Well, perhaps your life insurance for the year, if you announce or you state that you've got a medical condition, you've got a heart condition, will be £1,000. If you don't state you've got that heart condition, then it goes down to £100. So you're failing to disclose to make a gain. Fraud by abuse of position. Well, this is where a person occupies a position where he's expected to safeguard or not act against the financial interests of another, and dishonesty abuses that position with the intention to make a gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or expose another to a risk of loss. And it can be occur in a variety of ways, this, and occupations from there. I think I've done an estate agent valuing a house at 25% lower than the actual value to facilitate the sale to a builder or a friend, who in turn will pay the estate agent 10%. You're going there because you want that the integrity of that estate agent should be to sell your house for what it's worth. Possession or control of articles for use in frauds. A person has in his possession or under his control any article for the use in connection with any fraud, and this can be anything. It could be electronic programs to clone card numbers, or a clicker to get endless credits on a fruit machine or loaded dice, something you're going to do to trick the other person from there, or the machine or something to make to use in connection with any fraud. So making or supplying articles for use in fraud: makes, adapts, supplies any article knowing that it's designed or adapted for use in fraud or intending it to be used as such. So for example, we know the fire sticks now that are very common, the illegal fire sticks that people use with smart televisions that let them watch every channel, every new movie coming out from that, to pay-per-view events from that. So if it supplies or adapts from that. Obtaining services dishonestly: so obtains services for himself or another through a dishonest act in that payment has been, will be, or is expected to be paid for. So the service must be obtained and the service must be one available to pay for. So what I remember this question is from this. So imagine that I'm going to get a train from London to Edinburgh. Okay, and I don't have a ticket for that train. So I jump on that train without a ticket and I hide in the toilet while that ticket inspector comes around, and it takes me all the way to Manchester. I don't get caught and I get off. So at that point, I have obtained a service dishonestly. I've used that train where I should be paying for a ticket to do it from that. Now, say on the second half of the journey, I need to get from Manchester to Edinburgh, like I said. And what I see is a cargo train that's designed to carry parcels, to carry packages from there, so not people. Now, if I get on that train for the second half of the journey, I haven't committed this offence. And that's because the service I obtained is not one for travelling on a train. Don't forget there will be other offences from there, but not that one accounts. And finally, false accounting: dishonesty gained for himself or another, or cause loss, destroys, defaces, conceals, or falsifies an account or document to make it misleading, and it can be committed through an omission, so perhaps failing to add an entry onto an account. An example: filling out a life insurance application, and from that, it could be false accounting as well. It could fall into our example there. Right, let's move on to handling stolen goods and proceeds of crime. What have we got? 11 minutes, perfect. Right, there's a natural overlap between handling stolen goods and proceeds of crime, so I brought them together and we'll simplify it as best we can. But let's start by demonstrating your knowledge. Let's have another question. You've got them all right so far. So Keith agrees to purchase a car for £1,500 from an advert on a local social media group. Keith thinks it's a good price, expecting the car to be closer valued at around £2,000. Keith pays £500 deposit for the car and agrees to transfer over the further £1,000 on receipt of the documents. Keith never receives the registration documents for the car, so pays no more money, but has possession of the car. Keith is cleaning out the car several weeks later when he finds paperwork in the car relating to a different person to the seller. He now believes the car may be stolen, and not wanting to be in possession of a stolen car, sells it to a friend for £1,000. Considering handling stolen goods, which of the following statements is correct? Keith commits handling stolen goods when he realises the car he is in possession of is stolen. B. Keith does not commit handling stolen goods as he cannot be said to be disposing or realising the car for the benefit of another. C. Keith commits handling stolen goods when he sells the car to an innocent party for £1,000. Or D. Keith does not commit handling stolen goods as the car has been moved on within 12 months of purchase. So take as long as you know. Have a look now and see what you think the answer is. So Stephanie, you put B, Tom's put C. So a few C's, C's and B's. Jordan says B. C, we say Chelsea, PCB. So a real split, B's and C's. Oh, please, I'll put this question in now. To take your time. As I say, if you don't want to put the answer, you're more than welcome, but there's a split between B's and C's. Now, the answer is B. Keith does not commit handling stolen goods as he cannot be said to be disposing or realising the car for the benefit of another. Now, let me explain why this is. So this question has come from the case of R.V. Bloxham, 1983, where the appellant initially agreed to purchase a car for £1,300 and paid £500 as a deposit. He later suspected the car was stolen. The registration documents were never produced, and 11 months later, he sold the car to a third party for £200. He did this knowing the car was stolen and was convicted of handling stolen goods. But this was overturned by the House of Lords. Why was this? Well, Bloxham admitted that he had received the stolen car, unknown at that time, but had not disposed of it for the benefit of another. The House of Lords ruled that handling stolen goods can therefore be committed in one of two ways. The offender could do the activity themselves for the benefit of someone else, or they could assist someone else in doing the activity. In the case of Bloxham, like our example, the sale of the stolen car by the appellant cannot be considered as a disposal or realisation of goods for his own benefit. Now, this does not mean that in the example, Keith is innocent, as he could now be dealt with under the Proceeds of Crime Act when he sells the car knowing to be stolen, or also fraud offences. So let's have a look at handling stolen goods. Well, a person handled stolen goods if otherwise than in the course of stealing, knowing or believing them to be stolen goods, he dishonestly receives the goods or dishonestly undertakes or assists in their retention, removal, disposal or realisation by or for the benefit of another person, or he arranges to do so. So let's break down some of those terms. Otherwise than the course of stealing. So the thief cannot handle his own stolen goods under this offence. Know or believe. Suspect is not sufficient. The handler must know or believe. Turning a blind eye would qualify, but would need to show a belief by the handler that the goods are stolen. Stolen goods. Well, unsurprisingly, goods need to be stolen for the offence to be made out. Agreeing to handle goods before they are stolen does not satisfy this offence. Now, stolen goods are classified as stolen goods if they are the property that was originally stolen or if it's been realised. And what about stolen goods from outside of England and Wales? Well, these are still stolen goods as long as they were taken in circumstances which amounted to an offence in Wales from that or the other country, should I say. To by or for the benefit of another. If the only person benefiting from the defendant's action is the defendant, then the offence is not made out. Now, we cover a few other offences from here through proceeds of crime. So when it comes to proceeds of crime offences, there are distinct crossover with handling stolen goods. The key difference being that proceeds of crime can also be used against the person concerned in the theft. What a power. It's the easiest to consider the process of crime offence as intrinsically linked to money laundering and were designed as such. Now, there are three key offences which we'll look at shortly. Before we do, we need to understand the following terms. The first is criminal conduct. Well, criminal conduct is conduct which constitutes an offence in any part of the United Kingdom or would constitute an offence in any part of the UK if it occurred there. And criminal property is criminal property if it constitutes a person's benefit from criminal conduct, or it represents such a benefit in whole or in part, and whether directly or indirectly, and the alleged offender knows or suspects that it constitutes or represents such a benefit. So that gangster who purchases that £1 million yacht and it's come from criminal means is criminal property. So what about, let's have a quick look then at three of the offences. Concealing criminal property, section 327. This is where someone conceals, disguises, converts, transfers or removes criminal property from the UK. So we said similar to handling stolen goods, but this is a broader offence, meaning that the thief themselves can commit it. Now, there is a defence of an authorised disclosure prior to the act or just after intending to make such a disclosure, but having a reasonable excuse not to. Again, a very rare defence. Arrangements in relation to criminal property is covered under section 328. A person enters into or becomes concerned in an arrangement that he knows or suspects facilitates acquisition, retention, use or control of criminal property on behalf of another, and largely an offence for those that launder money for criminals, such as an accountant working for a gangster with a yacht, laundering money knowing that it's come from criminal means. An acquisition, use and possession of criminal property, section 329. A person who acquires, uses or has possession of criminal property commits an offence. And this is fantastic when it comes to the thief using the property. But this relates to a person who knows or suspects the property they have represents his or another's benefit from criminal conduct. So this states that no offence is committed. So there is a defence from that in relation to if they acquired, used, or had possession of the property in relation to reasonable circumstances, unless they know that by undertaking the above would assist the person carrying out criminal conduct. Right, breathe out from there, another wonderfully worded thing. So what is an example? So what about is a builder who knows he's working for a gangster and he's being asked to put up, say, a conservatory for a known criminal, but he's being paid a fair price to do so. That's £10,000. He knows he's a gangster, but he's being paid for that to be done from there. It acts as a defence, but of course it's a defence from, for the crime of 3 to 9. Right, moving on. We've only got 3 minutes left. Perfect. Criminal damage, including arson. We can cover this off nicely now. Question. Freddie was arrested for being involved in a pub fight on Friday evening. PC Crips witnessed Freddie and others throwing punches and fighting outside the pub at 11 p.m. And as a result, Freddie was arrested and taken to the local custody suite and booked in. Freddie, being a little worse for wear, didn't make this easy for anyone. I'm sure you've all dealt with these many a time, and continued to be verbally and physically obstructive throughout. He finally got placed into a cell. Freddie decided immediately to put his cell blanket into the toilet and flush it until the cell flooded, and as a result of his actions, the cell had to be closed until it had been cleaned, and the blanket had to be sent away to be cleaned and dried. In relation to a possible charge of criminal damage in relation to Freddie's actions, which is correct. It's only criminal damage to the blanket, as unless the toilet contained urine or feces when it was put down there. The cell, however, can be easily cleaned. B, it would only be criminal damage to the cell, as that was out of commission for a period of time. The blanket, however, can easily be washed and dried. C, it would be criminal damage in relation to both the blanket and cell, as the blanket could not be used until it had been dried out and the flooded cell remained out of action until the water was cleared. Or D, it would not be criminal damage in either case, as both would dry, and when dried they return to their original state. Oh, wonderful. Look at all of these C's that are coming up on the screen. Really, really classic case, classic question, bit of case law. Absolutely magnificent. Well done, everybody. C. Of course, it's criminal damage to both the blanket and the cell, as it cannot be used. So damage or destroy is actually not defined within the Criminal Damage Act 1971, but we have lots of case law over the years to guide us in this matter. In general terms, destroyed means that the items are rendered useless. So picking up a pint glass and smashing it from that is completely useless. You can't put 1,000 pieces of glass back together. And for something to be damaged, it would need some sort of repair or action to bring it back to its original state. So as we can see from our example, there's no need to show that damage was permanent or irreparable. And it's derived from the case law of RV Fire Act 2005. And ultimately, after many legal arguments around the nuanced meaning and interpretation of the words in the case, the Court of Appeal quite rightly determined that both the blanket and the cell had sustained damage for the purposes of the Act. So, without lawful excuse, destroys or damages property to another, where we said they're not defined, the terms destroy and damage, and it'll be a factor for the court to decide. But we know that case law has shown us that damage is easily rectified, and it can even be washing off water-soluble paints. There's a great example of that, where it's been put onto the floor, even though that, because some sort of remedial action has had to occur, the offence can still be made out. Now, if the value of the property damage is less than 5,000, the offence can be tried summarily, unless the damage was caused by arson. There, if it's over under 300, dealt with by an FBN. But if it's racially or religiously motivated, then it's triable either way, respective of the cost of the damage. Spouse or civil partner, well, where the damage to the property in question belonged to the offender's spouse or civil partner, then the prosecution will need the consent of the DPP. We know that property has a similar definition to that used in theft offences. And lawful excuse, where there are two occasions under Section 5 where the defendant may have a lawful excuse. One, the person committing the damage believes the owner would consent if they knew the circumstances. An example of this would be a neighbour breaking a window to allow the daughter's entry after she perhaps had been victim for a crime and he couldn't get in, which thought you might have lawfully excuse for that damage, and at the time of the act committed the damage in order to protect property belonging to himself or another. Well, imagine that a dog, or that your neighbour's dog, is enclosed in a car, is suffering serious distress and harm. You look at it, it looks like it's got no it's very hot, and if you leave it in that car, it's going to be from that, and it's been a mistake from that, and you damage that to protect that property. It's really, really common sense stuff. And when you read these questions, you'll see this. And look at the overlap that is when we looked at the reasons around theft, and we have consent around that from there. And in this, in order to protect property. Right, well, let's have a look at just the final slide. We'll have a look at some damages. We're a couple of minutes over. I won't keep you much longer. Let's just have a very, very quick look at this. Well, we looked at simple damage without lawful excuse, destroys or damages property belonging to another. We can also be committed recklessly. Aggravated damage, well, that's the same as above, but could endanger the life of another, but it cannot be that of the defendant. So remember that for aggravated damage, they can't endanger their own life. Arson, damage or destruction through fire from that, and a higher offence from that. Threats to destroy or damage property makes a threat to damage or destroy property intending, look at that word intending, that the other would fear it to be carried out or to damage or destroy his own property, which he knows is likely to endanger the life of another or a third person. Really pick out those key words: intention, the defendant's intention, the other would fear the damage would be carried out. So it's irrelevant if they even plan to carry out the threat, nor if the person feared or believed the threat. So if I said to my neighbour whose car was outside, I'm going to smash every single window of your car in, and my neighbour laughed it off, I had no intention of actually carrying out and smashing the windows of that car. They didn't believe it, but my intention is that my neighbour will fear that damage will be carried out. Well, then we have got the offence. Having articles with intent to destroy or damage, section 3, has anything in his custody or control to use or commit another to use or destroy or damage property belonging to another, or to damage or destroy his own property, which he knows is likely to endanger the life of another or a third person. Now, look at that. In his control or custody, well, this is a broader term than simply possession. The intention, again, of the defendant is key, that the item is used for the purpose of damage. But that, look, go back to that. Has anything in his custody or in his control. Now, do you remember I say about its nuances with these offences? Remember when we went back to aggravated burglary and we spoke with has with him. So has with him is closer to a person, and we said that could be in their pocket or in a bag they're carrying from there. But look at the terminology here: in his custody or in his control. Well, that suggests it could be further out from there, couldn't it? So you could have articles from there that are not necessarily in your personal bag, but they are in your control. So you've got that little bit of separation. And finally, contamination or interference with goods, to cause public alarm or anxiety, to cause injury to persons consuming or using the goods, or causing economic loss by contaminating goods or appearing to do so, or threaten that he or another to undertake the above. So a couple of offences here. Offence 1 would be, so you go and put razor blades in baby food in a supermarket, and some of you may remember that case from a few years ago, from their famous case that crossed over a couple of forces from there. And offence 2, calling up a company and telling them that they've put razor blades in the baby food when they actually haven't. So both are covered. So part of the offence mentions placing goods where goods of that nature are sold, consumed. So by this rationale, our first baby food example may not be made out if the contaminated jar was placed within, say, the clothing section of the store. But this hasn't been tested in case law. So I work on those two bases for this offence. Putting razor blades in the baby food in the supermarket, remember that's part 1, or contaminating, or calling up and threatening to do so. Look at that, 7:05. That's it. Fantastic. You have all been absolutely wonderful for this past things. Stephanie, I think we're going to upload all of those for the next week. If you so wish, they're going to be there before the exam. All 5 of those sessions are going to be there, Stephanie. So if you've missed any at all, then you're more than welcome to go and listen to those. You have all been fantastic. Listen, it takes a lot. 5 hours, half a shift from that. You've listened to that, and your exam results are going to benefit the hard work you've put into it. When you're answering these questions, and I've said this before, right? When you're answering these questions and these answers are coming up, it makes me feel brilliant, because it's demonstrating you are retaining this knowledge that you're working. And remember this that's coming through to you. Yes, you're working towards the exam and you're going to ace this exam, right? You're going to be absolutely brilliant from there. But everything you're learning in this exam, I tell you, is going to be useful in your career. You are going to absolutely, I'm sure you're all fantastic TDCs, or your PCs becoming sergeants or acting sergeants, but you're going to learn all this so you can put it and educate others. Listen, I've got one request from you from here.